Late one night, the sky above the desert looked calm and silent like always. The stars were shining softly, and the air was cool enough that even the sand felt still. People living in the small town nearby had already gone inside their homes, closing their windows to block the cold wind. It was the kind of night where no one expected anything unusual to happen. But nature had a surprise waiting one that would change everything for the people living there. Just before midnight, a strange light suddenly sliced across the sky. It wasn't like a shooting star, and it wasn't like any aircraft people usually saw. This light was brighter, heavier, and moved in a way that made it look almost alive. Some people who were still awake stepped outside, wondering if something had exploded far away. But then the light dropped lower, brighter, and faster, and soon the whole desert lit up for a moment, glowing white and gold, as if morning had arrived early. The ground shook lightly a few seconds later. Not a strong shake, just enough for cups and kitchens to rattle and for windows to tremble. Some people panicked and thought it was an earthquake. Others thought maybe a large aircraft had crashed somewhere nearby. Within minutes, phones were buzzing with messages. People were asking the same question: what just fell from the sky? At the edge of the town lived a quiet man who liked repairing old machines. Most people took their cars, radios, generators, and even kitchen appliances to him when they stopped working. He wasn't very social, but he was good at understanding things, especially things that needed fixing. When the bright light flashed, he stepped outside too, blinking against the sudden glow. As soon as the ground shook, he knew something big had landed in the desert. And he also knew he wouldn't be able to sleep without seeing what it was. He picked up his small flashlight and walked to the back of his workshop, where an old shed held all his tools. Then he stopped. He told himself he wasn't going to the crash site, yet not, while everyone else was confused and running around. He wasn't the type to rush toward danger. But something about the way the light had moved in the sky did not feel random. It felt like something guided it down, like whatever fell was trying its best to land safely rather than crash. Meanwhile, the town grew louder. A few people had jumped into their vehicles and sped toward the desert, wanting to see whatever happened before authorities came. But they didn't make it far. Before anyone reached the spot, government trucks were already blocking the small roads that led deeper into the sand. Uniformed people stepped out and told everyone to stay back. Their message was firm. The area was restricted until further notice. Curiosity mixed with fear across the crowd. Someone asked if it was a meteor. Another person said it was probably some secret aircraft. A few people whispered that it might be something dangerous. No one had any clear answer, and that only made the tension grow. Over the next few hours, giant vehicles moved into the desert with bright lights on top. They shone across the sand like search beams, creating moving shadows. People watching from a distance noticed something odd. Normally, after a crash, emergency workers rushed straight to the center. But this time, they stayed back. They didn't step too close. They moved slowly, cautiously, and kept whispering to each other through radios. Whatever was lying out there clearly wasn't something they understood. The mechanic from the edge of town didn't go near the blocked roads. He simply walked behind his workshop to a hill he often visited. The hill provided a wide view of the desert, especially at night. From there, he could see the bright spotlights moving like white insects. He squinted, trying to make out the shape lying in the middle of all the activity. At first, he thought it was a large piece of metal. But after a moment, he realized it wasn't just metal, it was curved, smooth, and glowing faintly as if it wasn't broken at all. No aircraft he had seen ever looked like that. Hours passed, and the spotlights only grew brighter. People in town were now either asleep or glued to their windows. Rumors continued spreading, but all anyone could say for sure was that the thing didn't belong there. Then something unexpected happened. From inside the strange object. Something moved. Even from far away, the mechanic could see it. At first it looked like a shadow shifting, but then it grew bigger, like a large animal trying to stand up. The search teams immediately stepped back, raising their hands slightly in alarm. No one ran toward it. No one offered help. Instead, their fear grew stronger. The shadow stepped out of the glowing object, and under the bright beams, its form became clear. It had the shape of a large dog, but bigger and heavier than any dog the mechanic had ever seen, almost as tall as a person. Its fur was dark, patchy, and looked worn out, like something that had been through a harsh journey. Its eyes glowed faintly, not angrily, but with an old, tired look, almost like it had lived for many years, maybe more than what was normal. The creature didn't roar or charge. It didn't attack or chase anyone. Instead, it stumbled a little, as if weak. Its legs dragged slightly across the sand. Still, the people around it panicked. They held their positions, forming a tight circle, but keeping a safe distance. Some spoke nervously into their radios. Others pointed search beams directly at the creature, making it flinch as the bright light hit its face. The mechanic watched all of this from his hill. But unlike the others, he didn't feel fear. He felt something else, curiosity, mixed with concern. From the way the creature moved, he could tell it wasn't trying to harm anyone. It looked confused, lost, and maybe even scared. Animals didn't behave like that when they wanted to attack. They behaved like that when they needed help. The creature lowered its head and sniffed the sand, then looked up at the people surrounding it. Its breathing was heavy and slow. The mechanic could tell it was exhausted. It took one weak step forward, but the ground beneath it shook slightly from the weight, and it almost fell. The teams panicked again. They stepped back, but they didn't offer help. It was clear they didn't know how to approach something like this. They were trained for accidents, fires, natural disasters, not for creatures that didn't belong on Earth. Finally, after a few minutes of staring at each other, the creature lay down on the sand, curling itself slowly, almost protectively, like it was guarding something inside its glowing pod. Every muscle in its body looked tired. Its fur shimmered faintly under the lights, making it look even more mysterious. People watching from a distance whispered again. Some said it was dangerous. Others said it was a creature from another world. And a few said it might be the beginning of something terrible. But the mechanic didn't feel that way at all. He watched the creature breathe heavily and rest its head on the sand. Something inside him told him that it didn't come here to harm anyone. It looked lonely. It looked afraid. And if no one helped it soon, it might not survive the night. He stayed on that hill for a long time, watching silently until the search teams eventually formed a temporary camp around the crash site. They kept their distance, set up barriers, and pointed their lights toward the creature like they wanted to make sure nothing unexpected happened. The mechanic walked back home with slow steps, thinking deeply about what he had witnessed. He knew tomorrow would be different. The whole town would talk about the ancient-looking creature. They would make theories, create fear, and maybe even try to stay away from the area completely. But he wasn't planning to stay away. He had seen something others had missed. The creature wasn't dangerous. It was helpless. While everyone else was terrified, he felt responsible. Something inside him whispered that maybe the creature didn't need to be feared. Maybe it needed someone brave enough to step closer. Someone to show that not all humans react with fear. As he reached his workshop door, he paused for a moment. The desert behind him was still glowing faintly from the lights the teams had set up. He could still picture the creature curled on the sand, breathing slowly, alone in a world it didn't understand. He took a deep breath. He knew he had to return the next day, not out of bravery, but out of simple human kindness. The next morning came quietly, but people in the town were already awake long before the sun rose. No one had slept properly after what they had seen in the desert. Every small shop, every street corner, every home had the same conversation happening. What was that creature, and what was inside that strange pod? Fear had taken over the town, and curiosity followed right behind it. By sunrise, more officials had arrived. They blocked even more roads and warned people not to go near the desert. But fear didn't stop locals from gathering at the edges, trying to spot the creature with binoculars. Some climbed onto rooftops. Others stood on the tips of their trucks, stretching their necks to get a better look. The mechanic woke up before dawn as well. He didn't bother making tea or breakfast. His mind was too busy with the image of the creature lying weakly on the sand. He still didn't know what it was, but everything in his heart told him that the creature needed help. It wasn't attacking anyone. It wasn't even moving much. It looked more tired than dangerous. He walked to the back of his workshop again and climbed the same hill he had visited last night. From there, he could see the desert clearly. Officials had set up tall fences and placed more barriers around the area. Bright tents stood in a small circle, and people moved around them, talking into radios, carrying equipment, and keeping an eye on the creature. The creature had barely moved since last night. It was still curled up in the sand, its body rising and falling slowly with each breath. Its fur caught the sunlight, revealing patterns and marks that didn't look like anything from Earth. The mechanic studied it quietly. Its size, its shape, even the strange metal-like collar around its neck, everything about it showed that it came from somewhere far away. But he wasn't scared. In fact, watching it from the hill made him feel strangely calm, like he wasn't looking at something dangerous, but something misunderstood. Meanwhile, down below, the people working in the desert were more stressed than ever. They stayed far from the creature, never stepping closer than a certain distance. Some held equipment that beeped softly. Others kept adjusting the bright lights that surrounded the pod. A few people argued in low voices, as if they were unsure what to do next. They didn't know how to approach the creature or what it might do if disturbed. The mechanic shook his head gently. People were scared because they didn't know what they were dealing with. But he could see the creature wasn't a threat. It was simply afraid. He had seen injured animals before, abandoned dogs, wounded birds, tired horses, and the creature in the desert reminded him of them, only larger and stranger. Still, fear had built walls between the creature and everyone else. Except him. He didn't know why, but he felt no fear at all. Instead, he felt drawn to it. Maybe because he had always believed that everything, no matter how strange, could be understood if someone just took a moment to look closely without panicking. He took a deep breath and climbed down the hill. He wasn't planning to walk into the restricted area. He knew that would get him thrown out immediately. But he wanted to get closer to observe the creature from a distance where he could truly feel what was going on. As he walked along the border of the restricted zone, he listened to the conversations happening among the gathered townspeople. Someone said, "It's dangerous. Look at the size of it." Another person replied, "If it wanted to attack, it would have done it last night." A third voice whispered, "Maybe it's waiting. Maybe it's planning something." The mechanic ignored these fearful theories. People often jumped to the worst ideas when they were scared. Instead, he focused on the creature. Even from far away, he could see its eyes half open. The creature scanned the area weakly, paying attention to any movement. It wasn't showing its teeth. It wasn't tensing its muscles. It simply watched like something that had been through too much in too little time. Finally, the mechanic found a spot where he could stand without anyone stopping him. It was close enough to see the creature clearly, but far enough that he didn't break any rules. He took a slow breath and studied it carefully. The creature lifted its head slightly. Its eyes locked on him for a moment. The mechanic froze, not out of fear, but out of respect. He didn't want to startle it. He kept his hands lowered and his body still. The creature blinked slowly. Its ears twitched, and it seemed to sniff the air. Something about the mechanic caught its attention. Maybe it sensed something. Maybe it recognized that he wasn't afraid like the others. The mechanic whispered softly, just loud enough for the creature to hear if it was listening. He didn't speak loudly or make sudden movements. He just said a quiet, gentle line, something like, "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." The creature didn't react aggressively. Instead, its breathing became calmer for a few seconds, as if it understood the tone, if not the words. A few officials nearby noticed the mechanic standing there and hurried toward him. "Sir, step back," one of them said firmly. "This area is restricted." "I'm not crossing the line," the mechanic replied calmly. "I just want to observe." "This is dangerous," another official added. "We don't know what that thing is capable of." The mechanic glanced toward the creature again. Its head lowered back to the sand slowly. It wasn't threatening anyone. It wasn't moving toward anyone. It wasn't showing signs of aggression. "It was tired. It doesn't look dangerous," the mechanic said. "It looks hurt." The officials looked at each other. They didn't seem convinced. They weren't about to let a local man get involved, but the mechanic wasn't planning to argue. He simply stepped back a few feet, pretending to leave, but he didn't go far. He just moved to another spot where he could still watch without drawing attention. Moments later, something unexpected happened. The creature tried to stand up. It pushed itself up slowly, like an elderly animal trying to rise after lying too long in the cold. Its muscles trembled, and its legs wobbled. The officials instantly grew alert. Some of them held out their hands in alarm, unsure whether to approach or retreat. Others spoke urgently into their radios, but the mechanic saw what they didn't. The creature's movements were weak, unsteady, and full of effort. It wasn't preparing to attack. It was just trying to reposition itself, or maybe look for water or shade. The creature lifted its head again. For a brief moment, its eyes met his from across the sand. The connection was brief but strong. It felt like the creature was searching for something familiar, something safe. And somehow, it saw that safety in him. The mechanic felt a tug in his chest. A silent understanding passed between them. He stepped a little closer, not enough to alarm the officials, but enough for the creature to notice. He wanted the creature to know he wasn't afraid. The creature studied him again, then lowered its head back down gently. The mechanic realized something important in that moment. Fear wasn't the solution here. Understanding was. While everyone else was reacting based on fear of the unknown, he was reacting based on what he saw in front of him. A tired, lost being that didn't know where it was. He took another step forward and crouched near the sand. He didn't talk loudly, didn't make big movements. He simply offered his presence. Sometimes, just being there without fear could change everything. Hours passed like this. People came and went. Officials kept working. The sun moved higher. But the mechanic stayed. Every time the creature lifted its head, it saw him there, still, calm, not afraid. Slowly, the tension around the area softened. Even some of the officials noticed the creature wasn't reacting aggressively to the mechanic's presence. It wasn't growling. It wasn't threatening. In fact, it seemed a little calmer whenever he was around Dot by late afternoon. The mechanic made a decision. He was going to return the next day, and the day after that. As many days as needed. He didn't know what the creature was, where it came from, or what its story was. But he did know one thing. If no one else was brave enough to approach with kindness, then he would be the one to try. Everyone else chose fear. He chose understanding Dot, and that simple decision was the beginning of a connection that would change both of their lives forever. The next morning, The mechanic woke up before the sun again. He didn't need an alarm. Something inside him pushed him out of bed. It wasn't excitement, and it wasn't fear. It was a strange responsibility he didn't fully understand yet. He got dressed, washed his face quickly, and stepped outside into the cold air. The desert looked quiet from his yard, but he knew things were different now. Somewhere out there, an injured creature, something not from this world, was lying alone. He walked to the old hill where he had gone the past 2 mornings. The sand was colder than usual, and a thin line of pink floated across the horizon as the sun prepared to rise. He stood at the top and looked toward the crash site. The fenced-off area was bigger now. More vehicles had arrived, and tall equipment with blinking lights stood in the sand like metal trees. Tents had multiplied, and groups of people were already moving around, even though it was barely dawn. But his eyes went straight to the creature dot. It was lying in the same place as before, curled up loosely next to the strange glowing pod. The glow had dimmed slightly, as if the pod had gone into some resting state. The creature's breathing was slow, steady, and faintly visible in the chilly morning air. The mechanic studied it with concern. It didn't look worse, but it didn't look better either. And in the expressions of the officials standing around, he could see confusion. They didn't seem to know what to do next. He climbed down the hill and walked toward the nearest allowed observation point. Several townspeople had already gathered there. Some whispered, some stared through binoculars, and a few kept repeating the same fear-driven guesses from yesterday. Someone muttered, "It's waiting for the right moment." Another person shook their head. "No, it's too tired to do anything." Someone else added, "Whatever it is, we shouldn't go anywhere near it." The mechanic kept walking quietly. He didn't react to any of the comments. He knew people feared what they didn't understand. When he reached the boundary line, one of the officials recognized him from the day before. "Sir, you again?" The official asked, sounding tired. "Just here to watch," the mechanic replied simply. This time, the official didn't argue. Maybe because he could see the man wasn't causing trouble. Maybe because the entire situation felt so new and confusing that arguing about small things didn't make sense anymore. The mechanic stepped aside and focused on the creature. It lifted its head again, just slightly, as if sensing him. It didn't look toward the others. It didn't look around randomly. Its eyes moved straight to him. For a moment, the creature and the mechanic stared at each other across the shifting sand. The mechanic didn't know how, but he felt the creature recognized him not as a threat, not as another fearful human, but as someone different. He spoke softly, even though he knew no one else could hear. "I'm here again," he murmured. The creature blinked slowly, its tired body relaxing ever so slightly. Around them, the morning grew busier. More officials arrived with scanners, machines that hummed, and small flying drones that hovered at safe distances. The drones took pictures, collected air samples, and circled the crash pod like curious insects. The creature didn't like the noise. The mechanic could tell. Whenever a drone came too close, the creature's ears pulled back slightly. Not aggressively, just out of discomfort. The mechanic frowned. He didn't want the creature to feel more stress. It had enough to deal with already. After a while, some of the officials approached the creature cautiously. They didn't go too close. They just placed containers of water and sealed packets of food a good distance away, hoping the creature might approach them on its own. But the creature barely lifted its head. It didn't understand the containers. It didn't recognize the packets. Its tired eyes only followed the mechanic. The mechanic stood there thinking. He had experience with animals, and he knew one simple truth. No creature, no matter how strong or strange, wanted to eat or drink when it didn't feel safe. Safety always came first. Something inside him told him to try something. He looked around to make sure no one was watching him too closely. Then he dropped to one knee and slowly touched the ground with the flat of his hand. Not waving, not gesturing, just resting his hand on the sand. This was something he had done with frightened animals before. It was a way of showing he wasn't a threat. A way of lowering himself. A way of saying, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to understand. The creature noticed immediately. Its breathing changed slower, calmer. Its eyes focused on the mechanic's hand. It didn't move its body, but its attention had shifted entirely. A soft murmur spread through the small crowd watching from behind the line. What is he doing? Is he trying to call it? He should step back. But the mechanic stayed calm. He didn't make another move. He just waited. Nothing happened for a while. The sun rose fully now, washing the desert with warm golden light. The creature's fur glowed softly. The mechanic could see new details, thin silver streaks running along its sides, almost like natural markings or symbols. Its collar, which looked like metal but didn't reflect light, seemed broken or inactive. After many minutes, the creature shifted slightly. Not a big movement. Just enough to show it was paying attention to him, not the machines or the people standing around. The mechanic felt something change in the air. The creature didn't trust him yet, but it didn't fear him anymore. The foundation of trust was forming, slow but real. Later in the morning, when the sun was higher and the air warmer, the mechanic decided to try something new. He had brought a bowl of water with him, just in case. He asked one of the officials if he could place it closer than the sealed containers they had put out earlier. The official looked unsure. We can't let you go near it, he said. I'm not asking to touch it, the mechanic replied. Just a few steps closer. If we want it to drink, it has to feel comfortable. The official hesitated, talking briefly with a colleague. They weren't certain. They weren't trained for this. They didn't want to take risks, but finally, they agreed only for a short distance, and only with guards standing nearby. The mechanic nodded. He didn't argue. He picked up the bowl carefully and stepped forward, keeping his movements slow and gentle. Every step mattered. Every breath mattered. The desert was silent in a way he had never heard before. Even the wind seemed to pause. When he reached the allowed point, he knelt down again, placed the bowl on the sand, and backed away slowly. He didn't look directly into the creature's eyes now. He knew that could be seen as a challenge by some animals. He just gave space, patience, and quiet. The creature watched him closely. Its nose twitched. Its head lifted a bit higher. Then, something small but important happened. It moved. Its paw, large and heavy, slid across the sand just slightly toward the bowl. Not enough to reach it, but enough to show interest. Enough to show trust. Some people gasped softly behind the mechanic. They weren't expecting any kind of positive reaction, but the mechanic didn't react. He stayed still, calm, focused on the creature's comfort. A few minutes later, the creature leaned its head down and sniffed near the bowl. It didn't drink yet, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that it had moved closer, not away. This was the first, real sign of progress. The mechanic felt a warm sense of hope in his chest. Not pride, not excitement, just hope. This creature wasn't here to harm anyone. It was scared. It was injured. It was trying to understand this new world it had landed in, and it had chosen him. Out of all the people around to trust first. As the day passed, the mechanic stayed near the boundary. Every time the creature looked up, he made sure he was there. Not pushing, not forcing, just present. Sometimes that was more important than anything else. By evening, the creature had inched even closer to the bowl. It still didn't drink, but it rested its head near it. That alone was enough to show the officials something important. The creature responded to kindness, not fear. The mechanic walked home as the sun set, tired but peaceful. He knew tomorrow would bring new challenges, new steps, and maybe even stronger trust. But he also knew something else. He had become the only human the creature wasn't afraid of, and that single detail would change everything in the days to come. When the old man stepped out of the room, the boy finally let out a deep breath. He hadn't realized how tightly he had been holding it until that moment. His hands were still shaking a little, and his heart felt too heavy for his small chest. For a while, he just sat quietly on the edge of the worn-out wooden bed, looking at the faded lines in the blanket as if they could somehow explain his life to him. He kept hearing the old man's words again and again. If you want to change something, you must start by believing in yourself first. The boy didn't really know what that meant, but something about it stayed with him. Maybe it was the tone, gentle yet strong, or maybe the fact that it was the first time in a long while someone had spoken to him without anger or frustration. He stood up and walked toward the small window. The glass was scratched, and the frame had cracks, but he could still see the evening sky turning a soft mix of orange and blue. The sun was low, the world outside calm. People were walking on the street below, some returning from work, some buying food from stalls, some laughing, some worried, but all going somewhere. The boy watched them quietly, feeling like he was stuck in a world that kept moving without him. He touched the window lightly with his fingertips. It felt cold. Everything in this house felt cold, even when the weather wasn't. It wasn't the kind of cold that came from the air. It was the kind that came from silence, from loneliness, from the absence of warmth between people who should have cared. He turned away and walked to the tiny table in the corner. There was a cup of water and a piece of bread that he had saved from earlier. His stomach was empty, but for some reason he didn't feel hungry. He took a small sip of the water anyway, more to distract himself than anything else. As he sat there, he began thinking about the old man's visit. Why had he come? Why had he taken the time to talk to him, to ask about him? Nobody usually asked him anything. Most people saw him, but didn't really see him. They spoke around him, not to him. The old man had looked directly into his eyes, and that alone felt strange. He remembered how the old man had gently placed a hand on his shoulder before leaving. It wasn't a heavy hand. It wasn't a rough grip. It was light, steady, and full of something he couldn't name. Care, maybe. Or understanding. Or simply human kindness, something he rarely experienced. The boy rubbed his shoulder slowly, almost as if trying to keep the warmth of that gesture from fading. A soft knock at the door suddenly pulled him out of his thoughts. It wasn't loud and angry like usual. It was soft, almost hesitant. The boy quickly wiped his eyes, unsure why he felt emotional, and walked toward the door. When he opened it, he found the old man's wife standing there with a small bowl in her hands. She was short, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The boy froze, unsure what to do. No one ever brought him anything like this. She looked at him and said in a warm voice, "I thought you might not have eaten properly, so I brought this. It's simple, but it's warm." He looked at the bowl. It had a little rice and vegetables, nothing fancy, but definitely more comforting than the piece of bread sitting on his table. He nodded slowly, not trusting his voice. She placed the bowl in his hands, her fingers brushing lightly against his. There was that warmth again. Then she said, almost softly, "You're not alone, you know, even when it feels like it." The boy swallowed hard. For a moment, he thought he might cry, so he kept his head down, hoping she wouldn't notice. She didn't say anything else. She simply smiled at him and walked away. He closed the door and leaned his back against it, holding the bowl as if it were something precious. He walked back to his table, sat down, and tasted the food. It was warm. It was soft. It made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Comfort. As he ate slowly, he remembered small moments from his childhood days when life wasn't this heavy. He remembered laughter, warmth, and people who treated him kindly. Those memories were blurry now, like old photos left under the sun, but they were still there, somewhere deep inside him. He finished eating and placed the empty bowl carefully on the table. Then he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in many days, the air felt a little lighter. Later that night, he lay on his bed staring at the ceiling. The room was dark, except for a faint streetlight glowing through the window. Usually, he found it hard to fall asleep. His mind always wandered, and worries always kept him awake. But tonight felt different. His thoughts were quieter, calmer. He thought about the old man's words again. Start by believing in yourself. He whispered the words softly, like he was testing them. It felt strange to say them out loud, but somehow it also felt meaningful. Maybe he didn't fully understand them yet. Maybe he didn't know how to change anything about his life. But for the first time, the idea didn't feel impossible. Maybe, just maybe, there was something inside him that could grow if someone helped him believe in it. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual. The air was cool, and the light coming through the window was soft and pale. He sat up slowly and rubbed his eyes. He wasn't tired like other days. He felt steady, not happy, not excited, but steady. And that alone was enough for now. He heard voices from the other room, the old man and his wife talking softly. They weren't arguing. They weren't shouting. They were speaking to each other with calm, with respect. The boy listened without meaning to. He wasn't used to hearing calm conversations in this house. It gave him a strange sense of peace. A few moments later, the old man called him. The boy stood up and walked toward the living room, his footsteps quiet. The old man was sitting on a chair with a notebook in his hand. He looked up and smiled gently when the boy entered. "Good morning," he said. The boy nodded. "I was thinking," the old man continued, "it might be good for you to spend some time with us today. Maybe help me with a few things. Only if you want to." The boy looked at him, unsure. No adult had ever asked him like that, only if you want to. Most adults ordered, demanded, or pressured. This was new. After a short pause, he nodded again. The old man smiled warmly. "Good. Then let's start with something simple." The boy followed him outside into the fresh morning air. The trees moved gently with the breeze, and the street seemed quieter than usual. The old man handed him a small broom and said, "Let's clean the front area together." The boy looked at the broom, then at the ground. It wasn't a big task, but it felt meaningful somehow. Not because of the work itself, but because he wasn't doing it alone. The old man stood beside him, sweeping slowly, guiding him with patience. As they worked side by side, the boy felt something changing inside him. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly. Like a tiny light growing stronger each minute. He didn't know what the future would bring. He didn't know if things would get easier or harder. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't invisible anymore. Someone had seen him. Someone had spoken kindly to him. Someone had made him feel like his life mattered. And sometimes that is all a person needs to take their first step toward a better tomorrow. The next morning, the mechanic woke up before the sun had fully risen. He felt a strange mixture of tiredness and anticipation, as if his body knew that something important would happen today. The desert air was cold, crisp, and quiet, almost as if it too was waiting. He dressed quickly, grabbed his small backpack with a few essentials, and walked toward the familiar hill. From there, he could see the crash site clearly. The tents, vehicles, and equipment from yesterday still stood, but the desert felt calmer now. There was less shouting and more focused observation. The creature was lying in the same spot it had been the day before, its body curled loosely near the glowing pod. It looked stronger today, though still cautious. Its fur had a faint shine under the early sunlight, and the marks along its sides seemed more distinct. The collar around its neck reflected light slightly now, hinting that it might contain some kind of mechanism. The mechanic squinted, trying to understand what it could mean. Officials were moving carefully around the creature. They were cautious, but they had started to place more objects, water, food, small tools around the perimeter, hoping the creature might engage with them. Yet the creature didn't seem interested in anything but the mechanic. Whenever it raised its head, its eyes scanned the area, stopping on him. That tiny gesture of recognition made the mechanic feel both nervous and excited that he approached the boundary line cautiously, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. His goal was not to startle the creature, but to build trust, little by little. The creature's eyes followed him as he placed a small cloth on the sand, gently brushing away some dust and small debris. It wasn't much, just a small gesture, but in his mind, it mattered. The creature shifted slightly as he worked, lifting its head and sniffing the air. Its body language was subtle but clear. It was curious but cautious. The mechanic knelt down, resting his hands on the ground without making any sudden movements. He spoke softly, though he doubted the creature understood the words. "It's okay. You're safe," he whispered. "No one here will hurt you. I just want to help." For several minutes, nothing happened. The creature remained still, its eyes fixed on him. Then, slowly, it lifted one of its large paws and placed it on the sand closer to him. Not fully, not aggressively, just a small movement. A gesture that said, "I'm watching. I'm learning. I'm beginning to trust." The mechanic smiled softly. This was progress, the kind that didn't happen quickly. Every small action mattered. Every small movement was a step forward. He didn't want to rush it. He simply stayed low, quiet, and steady. By midday, the sun was warmer, and the desert seemed alive with the soft hum of equipment and voices from officials. The creature was now partially standing, leaning on its legs, but still moving slowly and carefully. Its collar glinted in the sunlight, and the mechanic noticed a small panel on it that seemed slightly open. He couldn't tell what it did, but he suspected it had some function. Perhaps it was a tracking device, perhaps something else. He didn't know yet, but curiosity burned in his mind. The officials were watching closely from behind the fences. Some whispered to each other, clearly unsure how to interpret the creature's behavior. Others jotted notes in their notebooks. Everyone seemed tense, waiting for some sign that would justify their approach or confirm their fear. The mechanic, however, stayed focused on the creature itself. He noticed subtle changes in its movements, the way it shifted its weight, the flick of its ears, the way it raised its head to watch him. Each gesture told him more than words ever could. He realized that the creature wasn't just intelligent. It was calculating. It was aware of its surroundings and of the humans nearby. Most importantly, it seemed to understand that he wasn't a threat. As the hours passed, the mechanic decided to test something small. He slowly reached into his backpack and took out a small water bottle. He didn't open it yet. He simply showed it to the creature, holding it low so it could see. The creature's eyes narrowed slightly, curious. It stepped forward just a tiny bit, moving closer than it had before. He carefully poured a small amount of water into a shallow container he had brought. Then he backed away and remained still, watching intently. The creature circled the container, sniffing and shifting its weight. Finally, after several minutes, it lowered its head and took a small sip. The mechanic exhaled quietly. This was a huge step. It might seem small to someone watching, but it was monumental in building trust. The creature had recognized him as someone safe enough to drink near. That alone spoke volumes about the bond forming between them. Encouraged, he slowly placed another small item nearby, a clean cloth he had brought to wipe some dust from the pod and the creature's collar. The creature watched carefully, but didn't back away. Instead, it leaned slightly toward it, sniffing again. The mechanic kept his movements gentle, deliberate, and respectful. He knew the key was patience. Not force. By late afternoon, something remarkable happened. The creature, still cautious, moved fully toward him for the first time. It didn't touch him yet, but its body language was clear. It was curious and beginning to trust him more than anyone else present. The officials whispered among themselves, clearly surprised. Some looked nervous, others amazed. They didn't understand what had changed overnight, but they could see it. The creature had chosen him. The mechanic knelt slowly, resting both hands on the ground again. He spoke softly, barely above a whisper, though his voice carried something different this time, a combination of patience, calmness, and assurance. "You're safe with me," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just here to help." The creature lifted its massive head slightly, tilted it, and seemed to study him carefully. Then it stepped closer, moving its front legs forward in a cautious but deliberate way. The mechanic held still, steady, and relaxed his shoulders. Finally, the creature rested one of its huge paws near the mechanic's hand. It didn't touch him yet, but the proximity was enough. It was a silent acknowledgement of trust, a sign that it recognized him as someone different from all the others who had approached it before. The mechanic felt a warmth in his chest. He didn't say anything. He simply stayed still and let the creature feel safe. He understood that trust couldn't be rushed. It was fragile, delicate, and rare. Hours passed with small, careful interactions. The creature drank, sniffed, and moved slightly closer several times, always aware of the humans behind the fences, but focusing more on the mechanic. The man noticed that the creature's breathing became calmer, its movements more fluid. It was regaining strength, and with it, it was beginning to show personality, curiosity, caution, and something almost like loyalty. By evening, the mechanic knew he had reached a turning point. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He had become a part of the creature's small world. The bond between them had grown in a single day, but it was strong enough to give him hope. As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and pink, the creature finally rested its massive head near the mechanic's knee, not fully trusting yet, but enough to show comfort in his presence. The mechanic's heart raced with quiet joy. It was a moment of connection, simple, powerful, and human. He knew that tomorrow would bring more challenges. There would be more observations, more questions from the officials, and perhaps more misunderstandings. But he also knew something far more important. He had proven that patience, kindness, and calm presence could bridge a gap that fear had built over generations. He packed up his belongings slowly, keeping one eye on the creature. It remained calm, watching him without panic. He smiled faintly, knowing that even though it was far from home, it had begun to trust a human for the first time. Walking back toward the hill, the mechanic looked back at the desert. The creature's eyes followed him, still wary, but no longer fearful. A small sense of pride and hope filled his chest. This bond, fragile yet real, was something extraordinary. It was proof that understanding and kindness could reach even the most cautious, even the most alien creatures. And as the night fell, the mechanic knew one thing for sure. Tomorrow, he would return. And every day after, he would continue to be there, not out of obligation, not out of curiosity, but because he had become the bridge between a frightened being and a world that didn't yet understand it. The next morning, the mechanic woke with a sense of quiet determination. The desert was cool and still, the kind of morning when even the smallest sound seemed louder and more important. He had walked this path for several days now, but today felt different. Today, he felt the bond he had been building with the creature growing stronger, and something inside him told him that progress was about to take a meaningful turn. As he approached the hill overlooking the desert, he saw the familiar glow of the pod. The creature was already awake, standing slowly, its large eyes scanning the area. When it saw him, it paused, as if acknowledging his presence. The mechanic smiled softly. This simple recognition had become a daily ritual, a moment of mutual understanding that didn't require words. Officials were more relaxed today, though still cautious. They had noticed the change in the creature's behavior. It no longer trembled or flinched at their presence, and it had even moved closer to the boundary line where the mechanic had been standing. Some of them whispered to each other, clearly impressed. Others seemed wary, unsure whether to trust what they were witnessing. The mechanic stepped closer to the boundary, moving carefully. Today, he had brought a small blanket and a few pieces of food that the creature might eat. He placed them gently on the sand, not too close to startle it. The creature's eyes followed him, curious but careful. Then, slowly, it walked forward, testing the space around him. The first moment it approached felt delicate. Its massive paws made soft impressions in the sand. The mechanic stayed low, his hands resting lightly on the ground, silent and steady. The creature sniffed the blanket and the food before finally lowering its head and tasting a piece. The simple act of eating in the presence of a human it trusted felt monumental. He watched quietly, careful not to make any sudden movements. Each small step the creature took toward him was a victory. Each cautious glance was a sign of trust. And he realized that this trust was fragile, built on patience and kindness, not fear or force. Hours passed, and the creature became more comfortable. It shifted its weight, stretched, and even let out soft sounds that were almost like sighs. The mechanic realized that these sounds were new. They hadn't been there when he first arrived. The creature was relaxed enough to express itself naturally, a sign that it was beginning to feel safe in this strange world. At one point, the mechanic extended his hand slowly, palm down, toward the creature. He didn't expect it to touch him, but he wanted it to feel the offer. The creature hesitated, studying him carefully. Then, with a careful, deliberate motion, it brushed its paw lightly against his hand. The mechanic felt the warmth, the texture, the sheer presence of life that had once seemed so distant and untouchable. He didn't move or react suddenly. He simply stayed calm, letting the creature feel his steadiness. Nearby, the officials whispered among themselves. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others watched silently, as if they didn't want to interrupt what they were witnessing. The mechanic understood their caution. This was extraordinary, unusual, even unbelievable. But for him, it was simple. It was the natural result of care, patience, and trust. As the sun rose higher, the heat of the desert began to build. The mechanic offered the creature water again, this time placing it slightly closer. The creature drank without hesitation, glancing at him occasionally as if to say, "I know you are here, and I feel safe." The mechanic smiled. This small moment meant more than he could describe. It was proof that even the most cautious beings could form connections if given patience and respect. He spent the rest of the day observing and interacting gently. The creature moved more freely, exploring the sand around it while keeping him in sight. It sniffed the blankets, nudged small objects, and even let out a few low sounds, testing its surroundings. The mechanic followed slowly, never rushing, always keeping his presence calm and predictable. By late afternoon, something remarkable happened. The creature finally approached him completely, resting its massive head near his knee. It didn't move aggressively or unpredictably. Instead, it lowered itself slowly, in a gesture that felt almost human in its intention. The mechanic reached out gently and stroked its head. The creature leaned slightly into his touch, closing its eyes. It was a moment of complete trust, built over days of careful observation, patience, and understanding. The mechanic realized that this bond was something rare. It wasn't just about him helping the creature. It was also about the creature teaching him patience, empathy, and the quiet strength of connection. The officials took careful notes, clearly documenting the behavior. Some of them even whispered quietly to each other about the importance of what they were seeing. But the mechanic didn't pay attention to them. He was focused entirely on the creature, on its comfort, on its small gestures that spoke volumes. As evening fell, the desert was bathed in a warm golden glow. The creature lay down near the blankets, its breathing steady and calm. The mechanic sat beside it, resting his hands on the sand. He watched quietly as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky turned soft shades of pink and orange, reflecting off the creature's fur and making it glow faintly. For the first time since the crash, the creature didn't seem afraid of the world around it. It had found safety, trust, and understanding in one human being. And for the mechanic, the realization was profound. He had started this journey simply by showing care, patience, and respect. Now, he was witnessing the results of a bond that transcended fear, species, and even worlds. That night, the mechanic returned home with a sense of calm fulfillment. He didn't feel tired. He felt content. He knew tomorrow would bring more challenges, but he also knew that the foundation of trust had been laid. The creature was no longer an unknown, frightening being. It had become a companion, a silent friend, and a living reminder of the power of patience and empathy. The next morning, he returned again. This time, the creature approached him more quickly, resting its head beside his legs almost immediately. The officials were amazed. They had expected the creature to be cautious for weeks, if not months. Yet in a few days, trust had grown strong enough to allow this calm interaction. The mechanic spent hours with the creature, observing, learning, and responding to its subtle cues. He noticed small details, how it tilted its head when curious, how it shifted its weight when cautious, and how it responded to gentle gestures with a quiet calm. Each observation strengthened the connection between them, reinforcing the idea that understanding could overcome fear. As days passed, the bond became more evident. The creature followed him within the safe perimeter, resting near him, playing gently with objects, and responding to his presence with quiet acknowledgement. Officials documented every step, realizing that what they were witnessing was unprecedented. The mechanic didn't seek recognition. He wasn't doing this for fame or reward. He simply felt a deep sense of responsibility and empathy. He knew that this creature, far from its home, had no one to trust but him, and he was determined to honor that trust, not with force, but with patience, care, and understanding. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the mechanic sat beside the creature and spoke softly, even though it couldn't fully understand the words. "You're safe now. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I'm here, and I'll stay with you." The creature rested its head on the sand, eyes half closed, exhaling softly as if acknowledging the promise. For the first time, the mechanic felt a sense of peace that went beyond relief or happiness. It was a profound calm, a sense that he had made a difference. That trust had been built, and that patience had created a bond strong enough to change lives. In the days that followed, the mechanic continued his careful interactions. The creature became more comfortable with humans nearby, though it always stayed closest to him. Officials gradually adjusted their approach, learning to respect the creature's cues rather than imposing fear-based measures. The mechanic's bond with the creature became an unspoken example of the power of patience, kindness, and understanding. Through quiet observation, careful gestures, and gentle presence, he had transformed fear into trust, isolation into connection. and uncertainty into hope. Finally, one evening, as the sun set in a blaze of golden light, the creature stood fully beside him, looking at the horizon. The mechanic felt a deep, unspoken acknowledgement in that moment, a recognition of trust, friendship, and a bond that neither time nor distance could break. He smiled softly, resting a hand gently on the creature's shoulder. The desert was quiet around them, the glow of the pod fading softly as night approached. For the first time since the crash, both human and creature felt a shared sense of peace. It was a moment that marked the end of fear and the beginning of understanding. A moment that proved patience, care, and kindness could bridge worlds, build trust, and create bonds where none seemed possible. And in that quiet desert, under the fading light, the mechanic knew that no matter what challenges came next, he and the creature had found something stronger than fear, a connection born from understanding, courage, and human empathy.